Okay, so good morning. Welcome everybody, Boker Tov. Bob Smolin is still in Florida, so he asked me to help out. My name is Craig Padover, and I am a member of the Adult Education Committee of Temple Israel. And today's talk is being live streamed and will be available on the Temple Israel YouTube channel shortly. So the Jewish comedian Amy Schumer once jokingly said, "All Jewish holidays boil down to the same thing. They tried to kill us, they didn't succeed, now let's celebrate and eat." Purim is certainly one of those holidays. However, one of the great joys in being a Jew in the 20th and 21st century is the uncovering of archaeological findings that document our ancient connection to history and give us, as contemporary Jews, context and meaning. Today's discussion is about the recent discovery of a 3rd century CE synagogue in, I hope this is the correct pronunciation, Dura-Europus, Syria, that contained the earliest known paintings of biblical scenes, including, in this case, a Dura painting of Queen Esther and Ahasuerus. Dr. Ira Spar is professor of ancient history at Ramapo College of New Jersey and a former research Assyriologist at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He's also a longtime member of Temple Israel. Professor Spar received his Ph.D. in ancient history and archaeology from the University of Minnesota. He's the author of multiple books and articles on the ancient world. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Ira Spar.
Thanks, Craig. Let's see, live streaming people. Hi, up there. When I was really young, really young, I used to sit in a high chair, and my mother said I wouldn't eat until she told me a story. And when I heard the story, my mouth widened open, and I'd say, "Oh," and they stuffed the spinach in my mouth. And to the day, spinach is still my favorite vegetable because I associate it with the story. So that concept of always having to be with a story took hold when I went to school. And I remember in elementary school, I would go to a shelf. I can still see the shelf in our elementary school library. And there were all the adventure books. And I would read all the adventure books. But the thing that would really set me apart was my father. My father was a factory worker. He was an electrician in a factory. And he always invested in the stock market. Never made any money, mostly lost money, but that was his hobby. So he would take me each week or each month to our local library, and he would go up to the 2nd floor of New Rochelle Library on the reading room, and he would sit down and he would pull out all of the stock market reports and devour them and leave me alone. He says, "Go ahead, do whatever you want." So I wandered, and I wandered into the stacks, and I came across 919.9. I still remember it. And there were books about explorers, Ernest Henry Shackleton, Admiral Byrd, and the like, Edmondson, all Antarctic explorers. So I became fascinated with penguins and exploring. And I read not only the books about them, but I read all their diaries as well. And my mother was very worried about me because I wasn't doing well in school. And I was reading all these. So she went to my teachers in school and said, "What's wrong with my son?" And I say, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with him. He just doesn't pay any attention. He's reading all these other books. He'll be okay." Well, that continued. And I always continued reading any adventure books that I could find. And then I had a revelation occurred one time. I went off to college, and the idea of being off at college was to get as far away as my Jewish mother as possible, but still close enough to come home for holidays, of course. And I rented a room on Massachusetts Avenue in Washington, D.C., about a 15-minute or so walk to the campus. It was a beautiful house, had 3 stories to it, and they rented out the 3rd floor of the house. And strangely enough, right around the corner, in this very wealthy area of Washington, D.C., was Washington Hebrew Congregation, a Reformed synagogue. And I remember the services there. It's the place I wouldn't go to, because when it came to the Yontiv, and you had to blow the shofar, they blew a trumpet instead. It was a beautiful service, but it wasn't quite for me. But on Sunday mornings, they had a lecture series. And it was free. And they had a kiddush afterwards. That was good. And by the way, on Shabbos, the kiddushes were really excellent. So if you timed it right, you could go to your shul, and then you could end up at their shul for an even better kiddush. That was pretty good. I had a friend of mine, he drove around, he got his whole week's worth of food at different kiddushes, because he had them all timed in Washington, D.C. He said, "Oh, Ira, we got to go. It's 12:15, in 3 minutes we have to hit, they'll be singing Adon Olam." So as we would walk into Adon Olam and everybody started walking out, well, okay, so it was a bar mitzvah, of course. Well, which side? Oh, we're on the other side. So you just fit in, he loaded up, okay, we got in the car, we got to go to the next kiddush. When you're undergraduate, you got to eat. But in any case, there was these lectures. And they were in all areas of Judaism, presented by Jewish lecturers and university professors who weren't Jewish. And one day, there was this lecture by Ernest Goodenough of Yale University. And he had just published a 12-volume set of Jewish symbols from the Greco-Roman period. Oh my God, 12 volumes, what is this all about? And it was about the discovery of a place called Dura-Europus, which had been discovered in Syria many years before, but it was just being published now when I was an undergraduate. And he was commenting on it from a Christian perspective. So immediately after the lecture, which I was just gobsmacked with the lecture, I said, "Oh my God, I gotta go to Syria." And that's gonna be a little difficult, but I gotta go to Syria, I gotta see this spot. And I went to the library, and I couldn't understand most of his writing, because he was relating the discovery to Christian ideas, and you'll see how important this discovery was to Christian ideas. And only in the last now 20 to 30 years have this discovery, which was made about 100 years ago, been turned around by Jewish scholars, who are now reinterpreting the original reports to indicate that this was a section of Jewish history and culture that really wasn't known before. It was reflected in the commentaries on the Targumim, on the commentaries on the Bible, translated into Aramaic, with all sorts of midrashic stories that did not become mainstream in Judaism, but some of which became mainstream in Christianity. And you'll see how important that is as we go along. So I determined I must go see Dura-Europus. Well, that was pretty impossible, until I got an appointment at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And then I immediately asked my head of my department of ancient Near Eastern art, can I go to Iraq? Because the museum was excavating in Iraq. And he said, no. It's too dangerous for a Jew to go in Iraq. I can't protect you in case something happens. So that was out. But then something else happened. And it was about 20 or so years ago. the British School of Archaeology asked the Metropolitan Museum of Art for money to excavate in Syria. I said, aha, excavate in Syria. This is an old excavation done by Sir Max Mallowan in the 1930s. And all of you know Max Mallowan. I'm sure everybody heard of Max Mallowan, right? You ever hear of him? His wife is Agatha Christie. And Agatha Christie's books were written at this particular site of Tel Brak. Many of them, she sat in a little corner in the dig house. There was a typewriter. There was just a tiny little, and that's where she wrote. And I remember in one of her stories, she says, someone came up to her and said, Madam, you have to come immediately. There's a great discovery. There's a great discovery. And she said, no, I can't come. The corpse has just been killed. I got to stay in Agatha Christie's tent on the dig. This was, oh my God. So anyway, I said, can I come? And they said, well, if you can get a passport, just say you're a Unitarian. Let me think about this for a while. So I got the application for the visa, didn't indicate a religious affiliation, and I went on the dig. I got to Syria, got off the plane. There's no airport here. This is way at the edge of Syria on the Iraqi border, and the plane gets down in a field. They throw out all your luggage, you go, and suddenly a bunch of cabs come up. You negotiate, get into the cab, and I'm ready to go. And the cab driver goes and gets 2 other people. So, okay, now we're filled up. 2 women sit in the back seat, they don't say a thing. And you go down the road for about 10 minutes, here come the police. The police pull you off. Turns out every 10 minutes there's another police stop where they pull you off. And the police guy comes in there. This is Syria now. If you want to know travel to Syria, this is your techniques of how to go. Be prepared for lots of bribe money for the police, because that's the way they make their living. So the police come, they peer in the window, they look at me, I'm ready to get out my passport. They look in the back seat, they turn around, they leave. What do I know? Okay, we go down 10 minutes later, same thing happens. 10 minutes later, same thing happens. Finally, we arrive at the dig site, and I get out to pay, and the 2 ladies in the back say in perfect English, oh, they wouldn't dare. Our father is the police chief. And I didn't have to pay. It's on us. So I arrived in the dig site. And after working on the dig for a while, there were some issues going on. You've got to be careful when you're on a dig site, because one of the young graduate students decided to have an affair with one of the workers. That was not good. And then she ended up, on our day off, she would go to a certain site, which I had walked around beforehand, and she leaped it down and she picked up a little piece of pottery, nice little pottery, it's 3,000 years old. She put it in her pocket, and the police came swarming around, and she was arrested and thrown in jail. I think I better leave the dig and go on my trip and go in search of Dura-Europus. So after a while on the dig, I had already planned for taking several weeks by myself, just traveling around Syria and going to ancient sites. And finally, I arrived at Dura-Europus. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, this afternoon. So here is Dura-Europus. Look at this. David? All right, we're going to try it one more time. You push the button. Craig, I'm pushing this button down. Why is it doing this? Okay, that's the second slide. And so you can see Dura-Europus is in the desert, this fortress-like area. And that's the name of the site, fortress. Dura, in Aramaic and in Akkadian, means wall, strong wall. That is fortress. Europus means it was founded by a successor of Alexander the Great, who called it the European. So the European fortress is Dura-Europus. Now let's see if this is going to work. Down. There we go. Okay. I'm going to hit the down again. Yeah. Oh, no, that's the up. Let's try it. Yeah. Oh, okay. So David was wrong. Okay. All right. So how do we get to Dura-Europus? How did Jews get to Dura-Europus? Well, Alexander the Great came into the Middle East in the end of the 4th century. And he conquered all the way across Greece. He conquered across Turkey. He came to Syria. He came to Iraq. He came to Iran. He came to Bactria and Afghanistan. And he invaded India on his way to China. And when he hit the elephants in India, he devised a way of defeating the elephants. And he was ready to go on across the Indus River. We're going to China. And his men said, "Genug. That's enough. Okay? We want to go back home." So he started to go back home, got to Babylon, and died, a young man in his early 30s. And who would take over? His general. And this is his first general, named Seleucus I. And he established Dura-Europus as a Greco-Roman type of fort on the edge of the empire, way on the edge of the empire, in a very, very hostile area. Okay, so a little information on. And there, the site flourished from about 200 or so. And we know Jews came into the area 100 years later. So by 100, 150 or so BCE, Jews were already living in Dura-Europus. And how do we know? Because they wrote inscriptions, and they gave the date on the inscription. So how did they get out here? This is not the time period when the temple is destroyed. And this is a little point we want to make. You might not be aware of it. The story of the 10 lost tribes, or the 12 lost tribes of Israel, that's a modern fiction. The northern tribes of Israel settled in Syria and in those areas. The southern tribes settled in Babylon. And we know where they settled, because there's been a recent excavation, and they found a spot in Iraq, and it's called Judah Town. That's where the Jews lived, in Iraq, not too far away from Dura-Europus. But at this time, about 100, maybe a little bit earlier than that, BCE, there was no destruction of the temple yet. So how did the people get there? In 63 BC, Pompey the great Roman general, broke off from his alliance with Julius Caesar and decided to conquer in the Middle East. In Jerusalem, there was a fight. There's always a fight between different types of the priesthoods. And they invited Pompey to come in. So Pompey came in with his army, deposed the others, and set up their priests in the temple, the priests of Hyrcanus. And so Jerusalem was conquered for the first time by the Romans. And that was to have a great effect on Jewish history, because now the priests of the temple in Jerusalem were political pawns of the Roman emperor. And when you come into the 1st century of the Common Era, and you're dealing with the corruption in the temple of the Sadducees and the other priests that were around at the time, 2/3 of the priests were on the payroll of the Roman emperor. So there was enormous corruption in the temple, which is a background, of course, to Jesus' stories about corruption in the temple. But that's another story. It's another lecture. And so under Pompey the Great, people came in, and obviously people were forced to leave. Now, Rome started to expand. And as they expanded, can't get this to work. Okay, as they expanded, you see the colored areas. They conquered all the way up into Britain eventually, Spain, across Eastern Europe, down into Turkey, down into Syria, and not quite into the Euphrates region. So why not? This is the governor of Syria when Dura-Europus is there. His name is Crassus. Now, Crassus was the richest man in Rome. He bragged about his enormous wealth in real estate. That might sound slightly familiar. He also bragged that he was the greatest warrior of all of Rome. That might also sound familiar. Okay? And he bragged that he could do anything he wanted to expand the Roman Empire. And so he obtained a governorship in this area you see in Syria. Now, the idea in the Roman Empire, to get a governorship means you get control of all the taxes. You collect the taxes, most of it goes to Rome. Oh, no. Most of it goes to me because I'm the governor, and I pay off my army so that they will give me the money and Rome will get a portion. So with all of this, he gets richer. And of course, Roman generals, like Pompey was still around. Well, I can be better than Pompey. I'm going to invade Iraq and Iran. And I now will become the greatest of all the Romans. And so he does this. He forgot a little thing. The area of the Near East where Dura is located was controlled by a group of people called the Parthians. And the Parthians were fierce warriors who had mastered the idea of a military tactic that the Romans had never seen. They always knew that you attacked straight ahead in a line. They didn't know what to do when the line of the enemy broke and rode backwards, which was their method of attacking, because the Parthians had figured out how to swivel in their horses and attack going backwards. So Crassus was captured. And according to the legend, Crassus was captured. He lay before the Parthians. They poured liquid lead, some people said gold, down his throat, and then chopped off his head and gave it to the victor, ones who had captured him. And that was the end of Crassus. The Jewish revolt occurred in 70 of the Common Era. The Romans were still in charge of the temple. And we know this story quickly, of course. They destroyed the temple. They carried off the menorah. They placed it in Rome on the Arch of Titus. And the last remnant of resistance was at Masada. And here is the Roman fort at Masada. And we look at this and we realize this is the Roman way of fighting. They would build big forts, impregnable walls all around in a basic type of a square, and that would protect them against the enemies, and from there they could set forth on their excursions. Jerusalem was dead, and Vespasian the emperor issued coins. Coins were actually minted in Israel. It's Caesarea. And on the coin, if we look on the right-hand coin, you see IVDEA, Judea. And then next to it, Capita, conquered. At the bottom, SC, Senatus Consultov, edict of the Roman Senate. And on the other side, I am the Emperor Vespasian, and he gives the date of his consulship. Go cry, Israel. We are your conquerors. Don't you ever dare do that again. The Romans were very respectful of everyone's religion. They would never attack you for your religious beliefs as long as you paid your taxes and you prayed to the emperor. And if you didn't pay your taxes, but if you didn't pray to the emperor, you'll be destroyed. And that was the end of Jerusalem. And you can imagine now people fleeing Jerusalem, and it got worse. The Emperor Hadrian took over a little bit later, and he had something to do with, he couldn't understand this idea of circumcision or other rites that these Jews were doing, and he forced people out of Israel. And so some of them must have moved to Dura-Europus. And where is Dura located? This pointer is not working. Okay, so I'll have to point it out. Can we see here? No.
Try the very bottom.
Nope. All right, take a look at the red lines. So the Roman Empire goes all the way down. This is Trajan's war in Parthia. He replaces Vespasian. And he conquers, see where Babylon is and where Mesopotamia is? About where it says Mesopotamia, about in the middle. That's where Dura is, on a bend of the Euphrates River. And Trajan's war lasts about a couple of years. He conquers it all. And then what happens? The Parthians come back. And the Parthians take control. So the Jews are now living under Parthian control. And we know their houses are getting a little bigger. There's prosperity living on the edge of the Roman Empire under Parthian rule. And I saw this in Israel one time when I was visiting a Druze village in the north, right on the border with Lebanon. And you walked into the house, and there was a picture of Moshe Dayan. There was a picture of all the famous Jewish generals, and a picture of the famous Syrian generals, because they knew whichever way the armies came, north to south or south to north, they took down the other pictures. And this is important for understanding what we're going to see, that the Jews were living under Parthian control after they kicked out the Romans, and then the Romans kicked out the Parthians, and then the Parthians kicked out the Romans. So you had to reflect whichever culture you were under, and make sure that you integrated the two of them into your culture. Okay. So the Romans came back in 165. And 100 years later, the Persians came back again. So let's look at Dura-Europus. Doesn't it look like a Roman fort? And the key to understanding this is look straight ahead, right in front of us. You see that enormous drop off the cliff? And then we go to the left again, the enormous drop off the cliff. It looks like Masada, doesn't it? And then we go all the way on the other side, and there's a big gully. So the only flat area is the western wall right over here on our far right, the western wall of the town. And that's where they built the gigantic fortification walls. And along that wall, people built their houses, they built their temples, and you'll see what else. So here we see another view of it. Right on the Euphrates, so water is available, very nice farmland all the way around it. It's on one of the sub-trade routes, so they could make money with camel caravans. It was a very, very prosperous town. And so, 1920, a British soldier was digging a foxhole. And as he was digging his foxhole to protect against invaders coming from the western side, because that's the way, only place invaders could come. He found a wall and paintings on the wall. And immediately they called in an archaeologist, James Henry Breasted, who was at the University of Chicago. He was in the area. They outfitted him with the latest versions of cars, which was an absolute disaster because you never travel in the desert in a car. In case you get involved in a sandstorm, you never want to travel in the desert in a car. You always bring along 2 cars or a mechanic. And so he came, he noticed what was there, and he started to raise funds. And finally then, after a few more years, in 1928, excavations began. And what did they find? And this is really quite amazing. Along the Western Wall, you can't make it out here, but 16 different religious buildings, to Greek gods, to Roman gods, to Persian gods, to Christian God, to the Jewish synagogue. 16 of them. So you can imagine this type of community that was living here. So at first, the Mithridaeum was found. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Outside of the city, here you can see a great Roman arch called the Palmyran Gate. The site covers 180 acres, okay? And here is that gate today. I'm sorry, this is the Western Gate. So outside of the city, the Palmyran Gate, and then you came through this Western Gate. And when you came through this Western Gate, this is what remains of it, and you see that wall. The wall is really important because next to the wall, we can see these other walls. And I want us to look carefully at what was against these walls. This is the Mithridaeum. And here we see Franz Kumant on the left, University of Ghent, and Mikhail Rostovtsev from Yale University. And every time I see this picture, I shake in my boots, because Rostovtsev was the brilliant Yale historian of this period of time. And I had to read his books in graduate school and memorize them. And they were unbelievable scholarly. It was a disaster. I couldn't keep up with him. But they discovered here, you can't see it unfortunately, no, it doesn't work. Okay, Mithra, the god Mithra. You know the god Mithra? He was born on December 25th. The sun god next to him. Early Christianity this was a major discovery because all the Mithridaeum known from Rome are underneath the ground. Finally, one that it's above ground, and there are pictures on the wall. So that's why Kumant was one of the earliest excavators. The Temple of Bel. Bel is Baal. The Israelites worship Baal. Here was a full temple of Baal 1,000 years after the Israelite period of time. And in another temple, here the Roman soldiers you see on the right at a fire altar. And they're worshiping gods on the top left who are outfitted in military outfits. And on the bottom left, there are 2 images of Tyche, the Roman goddess of spirit and luck. Okay. Other gods that were worshipped.
Did you want the laser pointer?
Yeah, it's not working.
Yeah, I think you have it upside down. Let's try it.
I'll be jiggered. How do you like that? Gee, I got a new toy. Let me try this. All right. Oh, it works. So finally, 1932, they came across this wall. Now, the importance of the Western Wall, this was major importance to the history of Judaism. when the Persians were coming to attack, and the Persian army was approaching, and the Romans knew that this was going to be the end unless they can really protect themselves. And in the next lecture, I'm going to show you the Roman shields that were found, the Roman spears that were found to try to protect themselves against the invasion. They decided, we have to take this outer western wall and all the buildings, which are all of these temples, and collapse their roofs to make the wall double, triple thick so that they can't get through it. And so the roof of the synagogue was purposely destroyed. The roof of the Mithridaeum was destroyed. The temple of Bel was destroyed. The temple of Zeus was destroyed. And they doubled and tripled the size of the wall. And because of that, because they were covered in rubble for the next 2,000 years, that's why we have the results of what we were going to find in the synagogue and in the others. So let's see if we can interpret. So what do we see here? Here's the outer wall, right? Okay. Now just follow here. That's the shul. Okay. It's 25 feet wide, about 145 feet across, can hold about 150 people. David, how many people can get in here?
700.
Okay.
If you open the walls.
So if we say right from here, 25 feet, okay, and then
This room is about 200.
about 200, so about a little bit less than the size of this room. That is quite big for a population of 5,000 or so people, 5,000 or so people in Dura with 16 different temples. This must have been a very wealthy congregation. So that's the shul. Now see these magnificent pillars? That's as you walk into the shul. That's the inner part. Okay, Ira, do it right. Okay. So what do we see now? Here is called the House of Assembly. That's the shul. This is the forecourt where people, that's where you have your kiddush. Okay? Magnificent pillars to have a kiddush. And these are the houses of the people who built the shul. And so to get to the shul, you entered here through these houses. So originally, when the community was first established, they lived in these houses. And then as they got more and more wealthy, they built and they rebuilt and they rebuilt. And finally, in 245, the Common Era, they built this building. It lasted 10 years. And we know the exact date it was built because they said, this is when we built it and I paid for it. You always have that. Clark Hopkins of Yale, his wife, their little baby, their surveyor, members of the team, and of course the French guy. The French guy has to be there all the time because they were sharing this area with the French, and they hated him because his excavation techniques were totally different from Yale. Now what you see here, what do we see? That's Ahasuerus. That's Queen Esther. That's, okay, where's your Gregors? That's, let me hear it. Come on, who is that? Boo. And that's Mordecai. And that's, so we have Mordecai, Haman, Ahasuerus, and Queen Esther. No Vashti. Okay, the top layer has already been removed here. Over here is the bima and the shrine, and behind it, all sorts of things which we'll talk about now. Another one of the walls of the synagogue. So what was found here? Here it is, the synagogue. Now they're putting a roof over it to protect it, and they're cutting out the slabs. And this is what it looked like. They cut out the slabs. It's all restored. Next time you go to Damascus, it's in the National Museum in Damascus. 3 of the walls, 1 wall almost completely intact, 2 walls partially intact, and little bits in the front. So what do they paint on the walls? If we start here, here will be the ark. Very unusual ark, which we'll talk a little bit about this time and more next time. Okay? The biggest painting next to the ark is Purim. Now remember, they're living right on the edge of the Persian Empire. And around it, 1, 2, 3, 4, Moses. And coming out from the middle of the ark, originally there was a big tree. And I'll talk about what happened. Okay. There was a big tree over here. We'll see that in a minute. And the tree was painted over, you know. I don't like the tree. I want to show my family. So someone gave some money and they repainted over the tree. And we have the dates for this. But look, Aaron is the high priest, Solomon on his throne, Moses at the well, Elijah revives the widow's son, Samuel anointing David, Pharaoh enthroned, temple with cakes, ark in the lands of Philistines, Moses leaving, and that's not all. Along the walls, more and more paintings. So 28 different scenes are preserved from 245 of the Common Era, the oldest known paintings of anything Jewish in the history of Israelite history. Oh, going backwards. So let's start entering the synagogue. You ever been to a synagogue that had a shrine that looked like this? Okay, here we have ours, right? Notice the size.
You're missing what you want. You're doing the ark now.
That's right, we're looking at the ark. Now look at here. What do we have here? How can we put the Torah scrolls in this spot? Well, and what do we have here? A conch shell. And above it, paintings and big pillars holding it open. And now you're elevating to get to the spot where the Torah scrolls are going to be. And what do we find when we look at it? This is a Roman shrine. It's not what we associate with later Jewish bima, the later Jewish scrolls at all. It's a Roman shrine, okay? Now, how do I keep on pushing the wrong button? Okay. So over here are your pillars. Here's your pediment. Here are paintings inside. And here are your steps that go up to it in the same exact way. And the conch shell, all right? And here's a goddess emerging of the conch shell. So God is in the Torah scroll, inside and elevating up into the conch shell in the same way that we find Botticelli, who understood this in the same exact way. Here is the birth of Venus emerging from the conch shell. So what should emerge now from the, what should emerge over here then? The tree of life. So originally, God is in the shrine, and God emerges into the tree of life. The tree of life is the Torah, and the Torah spreads its wings out, and it gives life to all of the paintings in the rest of the synagogue, until someone said, "Now I want my sons in there." So let's look carefully now at what do we see above the conch shell. Go ahead. What do we see? You get another view, okay. Okay, another view. What's this? To the left. What's tall and round that we use on holidays? It's a lulav and etrog. Okay, the lulav and the etrog in the Temple of Jerusalem. And the Temple of Jerusalem looks like the conch shell. So it looks like a Roman shrine. Okay. And the pillars, the same way. We see the Corinthian pillars over here holding up the roof of the temple. And next to it, okay, here are, what do we see here? Okay. Trees, stylized trees, and above it, Genesis 22. Now, what do we see in Genesis 22? Okay, what is this? What's Genesis 22, guys? Come on, quick. It's the Akedah, okay, the binding of Isaac. Okay, so what's the story? God tells Abraham there's going to be a test. Come on, Sharon, you can tell the story. God tells Abraham, this is a test, sacrifice your son, take the knife, tell the boys to bring the wood up to the shrine, put the wood on top of the altar, and you know the rest. No, you don't know the rest. Because this is Syria. This is the edge of the Roman Empire. Here is the ayil, the ram. Yes, there are. You're going to see them in a minute. Also, you can't tell it, but right over here, you see this little line? That's the guy who paid for it. He put his name in there. Okay. So here's the ram caught in the thicket. Here is Abraham. Now, I want you to look carefully at the color of his hair. He has the knife in his hand. That's one hell of a knife, right? He builds the altar. Here's the fire. And on it, and God intervenes. And there's the hand of God, who says in the Bible, don't do it. Sacrifice the ram itself. So what is this? It looks like a tent or a stylized mountain, and inside is someone whose head is black. And what does black mean? Dead. Now look at the head of Isaac. Abraham has sacrificed Isaac, and Isaac is dead, and he's going up to heaven. Now, when this is first seen, is this Jesus? The Christians say, is this the origins of Jesus died for our sins? Quite possibly. Where do we get this tradition from? It's not in the Bible. It's not in the Talmud, but it is in a Targum. It's called Targum Pseudo-Joseph, Pseudo-Jonathan. And in this Targum, you can read it online. I went onto line to read it, and it gives you a translation into Aramaic of the Bible, and then it includes the story, and Abraham sacrificed his son, Isaac, on the altar. So there is a lot that we don't know that was never recorded except in some small little places in Jewish history that never became mainstream. And we have to think about that in terms of the nature of this community. So let's look at Israel a little bit later. This is really early. This is 245 BCE. Add another 100 years, and we go into excavations at Beth Alpha. You were at Beth Alpha with me. We went to Beth Alpha. Okay? And here is now the picture of, oh, come on, people. Abraham. And what's in his hand? The knife. Okay? And right over here, Isaac. Isaac is a little child. Was Isaac a little child in the one before? No. Another tradition says Isaac was an adult when he was sacrificed. And here is the ram in the thicket. And to answer your questions, now you can see it a little clearly. What does the inscription say? Okay, Yitzchak right over here. Okay, Avraham right here. The hand of God. And if you can read the Hebrew, it says, Al tishlach, don't do it, says God. And over here, V'hinei ayo, and here is a ram. So substitute with a ram. So the Jewish tradition in the land of Israel was that a lamb was substituted, a ram or a lamb was substituted for Isaac. But on the periphery of the empire, an adult, possibly adult or a teenage son, was actually sacrificed. And here you can clearly see Al Tishlach, God's hand coming down. And here's the ram, and here's the long knife. Now, where do we get these ideas from? I'm going to keep on hitting the wrong thing. So, about the same period of time on Roman coins. On a Roman coin, here is the hand of God with and this is the head, either denuded or destroyed somehow or other, or this is a fake. I just found it on the internet. Okay? To place it on the head of the Emperor Constantine. So it's a Roman symbol that the hand of God will interfere and come down and interfere in human activity. Okay? Again, we can't see it very well here, but I'll come back to that later. Okay. So originally, out from the ark, there emerged the tree of life. And the tree of life was the Torah. And at the top of the Torah is, can we make this out? A lion. And to the left, here is David playing his harp. Okay? So originally the idea was, we come to the Bema gives us the true word of the Lord. It's written in the scrolls. God emerges up above. He turns into the tree. And along the side of the tree, a table, another one, possibly a crown. You plucked up a vine from Egypt, you expelled the nations and planted it. You cleared a place for it, it took deep root and filled the land. The mountains were covered by its shade, mighty cedars by its boughs. Its branches reached the sea, its shoots the river. Why did you breach its walls so that every passerby plucks its fruit? Wild boars gnaw at it, and creatures in the field feed upon it. O Lord, God of hosts, restore us. Show us your favor, that we may be delivered. This, I think, is the message of the synagogue at Dura-Europus. That God will emerge from the tree, And all the symbols, all those paintings that we're going to see surrounding the synagogue will reemerge, and Israel will be saved, just as the way God saved us with Elijah, he saved us with Elisha, he saved us at the Red Sea, he saved us with Moses. And someone didn't like it. So they repainted it over with scenes of Jacob and his last testimonial to his sons. Sorry. So the Messiah, in my view, is the tree. David is the lion. The synagogue represents the restoration of the Davidic throne. He plays on the lyre, and there shall come forth a shoot from the stock of Jesse, and a branch shall flourish from his root, and on him the wisdom of the Lord rests. This is what I think they were saying in this magnificent synagogue, in which we've only reached in the last hour or so, just the very, very beginning. So finally, Purim. And what do we see in Purim? Come on. Achashverosh, Esther. I'm going to skip over this guy. Haman and Mordecai. Okay. So let's look more closely. How are we going to portray, if you're on the edge of the Persian Empire, how you're going to portray the Persian heroes of the Purim story? Let me go back. Okay. So here is Esther, right on the right. What is she wearing on her head? What is he wearing on his head? A hat. So who is more important? The queen. But what kind of a hat is she wearing on her head? Look at it closely now. She has this very, very elaborate hat on the top of her head. She wears a blouse. She has ringlets over here, necklace over here. Here's the king. We're going to come back to this. Notice that little spot over there. And he just has a covering on top of his head. You make it even clearer. Here are two goddesses. What are the goddesses wearing on their head? Full crowns, right? So she's being portrayed as the most important person by wearing the crown of a goddess, more important than her husband Achashverosh. So they want to tell the story through the clothing. Because in the Middle East, the tradition is to develop, if you look at Islamic painting, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, we have this whole beautiful sense, pictures of Islamic paintings. They're miniature paintings, they're this big. Everybody looks the same. They're all the same. The way you distinguish people is by their clothing, okay? They all look straight ahead in this Parthian view, but their clothing makes the person, it distinguishes them. And it goes all the way back to at least the 2nd century or the 3rd century BCE. So the person who wears the elaborate clothing, but now I want to go back. Ahasuerus anybody ever sit like this before? No. If you have splayed legs and plantoons instead of trousers, that means you're Parthian nobility. So he is the Parthian noble. He has his waistcoat over here, his very small cap or semi-type of crown. He has one hand next to his heart, and his other hand is outstretched. And right along here and over here and over here, we see the same thing. You recognize this scene? It's not in the book of Esther. Ahasuerus and Esther are sitting on their throne. They are surrounded by their associates, slaves or subjects, who are wearing Roman dress while they wear Persian dress, and someone comes to them, no beard. He has a beard, and it's a very scraggly beard. We'll look at it closely. He hasn't shaved. And he puts out his hand, and in his hand over here is a message. And who is this boy with this armband and this armband over here? That's an indication of his sense of nobility. And this goes back thousands of years before, and we see the king and his court will wear armbands to indicate two things: their importance as nobles and their concept of conquerors. So the nobility itself has come with a message, and he wears these plantoons covered with a coat. Now look, the coat, same style of dress. Is he a relationship to Ahasuerus? Is he the crown prince? What type of a message has he delivered? We don't know. And to the left, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the Jews of Dura-Europus. And the Jews of Dura-Europus are not wearing Persian dress. They're wearing Roman dress. And they have one hand, two hands, three hands out, and one person sits with hands crossed. So they're pointing this way because something auspicious is happening. And what is auspicious? Now let's look at who this is. A young man, maybe, how old do we think? Does not have much of a beard, wears a top coat and a very strong belt around his waist, decorated at the bottom. And it looks, when I first looked at this, I said, oh, look at all these scratches on his legs. I thought these were real scratches, till I looked it up further and saw a big blow up at Yale. These are actually inscriptions. So people came and they marked up Haman with inscriptions. Okay? And this is Haman. This is Haman. And he is being led by the guy on the white horse. And the guy on the white horse is Mordecai, who's wearing a crown. Okay? And he's wearing an elaborate coat, not like this guy. Here's the four legs of the horse, the two legs of Mordecai, and he's dressed as a Persian noble. Okay, so he's the Persian noble. How is this guy dressed? He's dressed like a loser in one of the Roman games. Okay? He's the loser. He's been captured, they're saying. So Mordechai has captured Haman, and a message is being sent to Ahasuerus announcing the capture of Haman, who's being brought by Mordechai to, and then there will be a big feast. That's what the book of Esther says. But this part of the story is not there. So let's see what else they're saying by it. Okay. Where did I put this in? Okay. So Esther 6:1, 6:11. So Haman took the garb and the horse and arrayed Mordechai. Haman took the garb and the horse and arrayed Mordechai and paraded him through the city square. And he proclaimed before him, "This is done for the man whom the king desires to honor." And what does our synagogue say? They take the image and they reverse the event. So it's a commentary on the book of Esther demeaning Haman. And Haman wears a wrestling belt. His legs are exposed. He's barefoot, symbols of a person defeated in a sport context. And the markings on the legs are inscriptions made by Persian visitors sometime between 245 and 256. They represent the responses of early Jewish or non-Jewish viewers to the synagogue. All throughout the synagogue, there are these inscriptions. They're graffiti, meaning, hey, look at our great shul. We're leading a tour. You want to see our great paintings? This is the best paintings in all of Dura. So people came in. I tried to read the inscription. I couldn't read it. It's written in Persian Aramaic. So it's written in the local language. And either members of the shul came in and were allowed to put the inscriptions on, or probably outside visitors came in and put the inscriptions on. Sorry. Okay. So here you can see Ahasuerus. Doesn't look so great, does he? He has a little scraggly beard. And notice now the way he's sitting. So typically, with a hand on your chest, in Parthian times, indicates authority. And he will typically have his hand out with a bird in the hand. The bird has disappeared, and that will mean he will be holding a blessing. Instead, his hand is extended, and he will receive a blessing, meaning the capture of Haman. Look at that, and the goddesses. And finally, we begin the tour of Moses, which dominates the rest of the synagogue. Tune in on April 28th for at least part 2 of our survey of the temple, the synagogue at Dura-Europus. Thank you. All right, we're open for questions.
So listen, we're going to ask you to please ask your questions into the other microphone so that the people on the stream can hear it. I'll start running, but someone else is going to take over. Okay. Who's first?
Dan has a question.
You go, Dan.
It seemed to me that the synagogue faced Jerusalem. It was facing the western wall of Dura. Was that done purposely, or was it based on the circumstances of how Dura was built?
I reckon I should have this slide.
Okay. Oh, no, better leave it on in case I have to go back, or you have to take it away.
For a little bit.
Okay. This is a constant question in archaeology. And we wonder, I want to go back to Egypt. Okay, one of the pyramids of Egypt has a causeway that's a mile long that goes from the main pyramid to a subsidiary pyramid. And along that causeway, there will be pictures of the reign of the king, things that were important in his enthronement and events that occurred. Well, typically the causeway from King Khufu, King Menkaure, all the great kings go like this. This causeway goes like this, and goes like that. Sorry, we're not selling you the land. So someone had the land right there. They had their family property there. They had their family tombs there. And no, you can't take the land. So he got to go around the land. So you build, number one, on the western wall because it's the most protected wall in the site. The other walls are not protected. After all, rains can come into the desert and can wash away that gully, can wash away parts of the wall on the three other sides very easily. So the western wall is the one to give the greatest protection. So you build there. Just happens to face Jerusalem, which makes it even better. Okay? And obviously, the Mithridaeum, the Temple of Bel, one of the temples to Zeus, of the 16 different buildings there, they get the prime spots, which meant that the Jewish population there, of a small population, to build this elaborate synagogue and to pay for all those paintings, had to be quite wealthy to get a prime spot on that wall. So I think the answer is yes, both. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay.
What language was the inscription where the person who paid for things, what language is that written in, as well as the graffiti?
Most of the stuff is in Aramaic, and you can easily read the Aramaic if you can read Hebrew. But other inscriptions are in this Judeo-Persian dialect, written in Aramaic characters, so it looks like Hebrew block script, but when you try to pronounce them, it doesn't sound right. So I couldn't read it. I didn't know what it said. But there are inscriptions then in Greek, there are inscriptions in Latin, there are inscriptions in Persian. This was a community that probably was secondary to Palmyra as a trading and agricultural center at the edge of the Roman or at the edge of the Persian Empire. So people were coming there because it was a prosperous place to live, and it offered Masada. It offered protection against your enemies because of that drop-off. No one's going to come across the Euphrates and up the cliff. That's impossible. And the other two sides as well. So if we can fortify the western wall, we can protect ourselves against those enemies who are going to be coming further to the east and moving west. Who's next?
I believe you showed archaeological evidence that the story of Purim might have been slightly different in that location. I'm wondering if you uncovered the actual manuscript, the Book of Esther, that would also show slight differences with their version of the story.
Okay. No books of the Bible were found there.
Okay.
Nothing were found. But there is going to be a big difference in what is found. You saw the shrine, right? Can we put the big Torah scrolls in that shrine? It wouldn't fit. It's only that deep, right? So what would a Torah look like? What would the enclosure, what would the Ark of the Covenant look like? And I'm going to show that in the next slide because they show the pictures of the Ark and the scroll on the wall paintings. And the Ark is that big. It's tiny. It has doors in it and drawers. So that there's a box like this, There are 6 of them. You open up the box, and there's a drawer there. And inside the drawer, you put your scroll. So the Megillah scroll that we have, the tiny Megillah scroll, that's the scrolls that were put into the Ark, because the Ark is only that wide. And this is a copy of a Roman library. The Ark was conceived of here because it was a Roman settlement. So the actual shape of the Ark is a copy of a Roman library box that you would keep to put in all of your commercial documents if you were owner of a house or if you're a owner of a public building.
Do you know why this synagogue only lasted 10 years?
Yeah, absolutely. 245 was a great time period. They must have had lots of money. They paid painters to make all of these paintings. But the Parthians had recently been overthrown by another dynasty in Persia known as the Sasanians. And Shapur I, who was the son of the king who overthrew the Parthians, those are the guys who write and shoot going backwards, had become the new king of Persia. And he decided to move from the east to the west, and the first place they're going to hit is Dura-Europus. So 10 years later, and we know the exact date, they came to Dura. They collapsed all the buildings on the wall, and it didn't make it. They came through the gate. I showed you the gate. They were able to undermine that gate, destroy the gate. They made incursions by digging under the wall in a spot near the gate. And once the soldiers came in, they flooded it and destroyed the whole city, and it was never reoccupied.
So, Dr. Spar, thank you so much.
Ira.
Ira?
I don't go with doctors. Doctors are the places you don't want to go to.
Good. Your humility matches your knowledge. What can I say? So a couple of reminders. One, this lecture exchange should be on YouTube probably in the next day or so if there's something that you missed. And the other thing to remind you is that Ira, when is the next lecture again? You said sometime in April?
According to Bob Smolin, he just sent me an email yesterday that we're going to have round 2, beginning with Moses, on April 28th.
Okay. So sounds great. So thank you again. And it was very, very interesting.
Ira, take this.